Last year, a beer company lost $27 billion off of a single ad campaign. Everybody talked about it, but there's a lot that I think wasn't said. And I've been waiting a long time to do it, so get comfortable. Most of the story is already known. Budweiser was the #1 beer brand in the United States, as a result of decades of honestly brilliant marketing. I was a kid in the 90s who obviously couldn't drink, and I still knew about Spuds McKenzie, the Budweiser Frogs, the What's Up Guys, and all the other commercials they ran. But of course, you change personnel over time, and the new decision maker went for a politically motivated campaign, featuring the TikTok influencer Dylan Mulvaney. Obviously, a lot of the underlying issues tend to divide people, so let me say right up front, this channel is not here to tell you what to think about that, or what political party you should be in, or who you should vote for. Here, it's all about how we think, not what we think. And in this case, due to things that happen in politics and on social media, we've seen a lot more visibility in issues relating to people's identity and orientation. There's anger involved, but it always seemed to me that the actual source of the debate wasn't really about who people sleep with. I always found it to actually be about high camp, which is a sort of exaggerated performance that people sometimes do in the LGBT community. But since both sides of the debate don't really talk to each other, they haven't actually noticed that that's the issue between them. High camp generally isn't meant to be completely serious, but the people who see it from the outside think it is, and just assume that the group doing it is crazy. Which is particularly interesting because I found that when it comes to Donald Trump's campaign, it's the opposite. A lot of what he said isn't taken totally seriously by his supporters, but people on the other side think it is, and they think that they're crazy. But anyway, in this case, the misunderstanding can cause problems because it can make us associate things with people's orientation that aren't necessarily part of who you sleep with, on both sides, and that can actually be separated from that. For example, when we dig into the causes here, there are people who say that they want their kids to have kids, and that your orientation could get in the way of that. That makes sense. But we also see a lot of the same things with people disapproving of the orientation of people who aren't related to them. And on top of that, it's been pointed out by others that a straight man actually has more options for partners if there are other men around him who aren't straight. But yet we still see that negativity there sometimes. So I think there's another cause. And I thought about it, and I think that a large part of the actual cause is the belief, I think subconsciously, that a person who doesn't act in a masculine way won't perform certain roles in society, like hunting, building, exploring, or defending the village, which are important, and which larger, stronger people are usually better at doing. But of course, if we think about it, a person's orientation doesn't mean they won't do those things, and people who seem to have no problem with it also seem to generate very little controversy regardless of their orientation. After all, we've had great artists, scientists, athletes, and even presidents who happen to be in relationships with people of the same gender, and it wasn't a big deal to anyone because it had no other effect on who they were and what they were doing in society. Likewise, today, you have performers like Lil Nas X who make good music and sing about riding horses and exploring, who are widely accepted. And even Bud Light themselves have had Pride Month promotions in the past that didn't come with anything but an acknowledgement of people having different orientations that most people didn't mind. But here, something happened, and it seems pretty clear that this particular situation with this particular person was different. Let's talk about why. First, Dylan Mulvaney obviously gets a lot of views on social media, but those views are of course decided by algorithms, or even people quietly manipulating who gets recommended for their own reasons. There's not actually any indication that Dylan Mulvaney has any particular talent that would cause people to be interested, or create entertainment in the videos. On top of that, Dylan tries to show womanhood by being openly dismissive or even ignorant of traditionally male things. This is not good because, for one thing, people generally don't like when someone is happy about not knowing things. And on top of it, those same things are exactly what Bud Light's drinkers do actually like. The brand spent decades associating itself with sports and similar activities that Dylan is openly not caring about. I don't think that's really necessary to be a woman. Women can drink beer, hunt, build, or watch sports. And not doing and insulting those things is pretty much the opposite of what you should do if you're supposed to be a spokesperson for a brand that has an audience and image that is tied to those things. I know that the executive who apparently approved this, who we'll talk about later, said that she wanted to expand the brand, but you can't do that if you lose your existing customers in the process. And it's not just Dylan's words that may have lost people in this case. I think it's also things you can see in the videos. First, Dylan's smile is pretty clearly fake. It's a performance for the camera, which of course is normal, but it's pretty obviously phony, which people tend to not like. And he barely drinks the beer and looks like he doesn't like it. And who opens a can with gloves on? But on top of that, there's one more major issue with body language, which I think has been kind of glossed over, but which I honestly believe was a major reason this whole thing happened. We talked about this in the Marlon Brando video and the ice cream liquor video. If you're doing something that is going to annoy the audience, you're going to increase that annoyance a huge amount if you lean into the camera while you're doing it. That body language is aggressive and invades the viewer's personal space. And that's not about politics or orientation. Before Dylan, there was a channel on YouTube called Fred that had a similar style but was just random comedy videos. People got annoyed by that too. And it's because when you do that, besides coming off as especially disrespectful, you actually create the urge for the viewer to get away from you. They want to push you away. And if they can't do that physically, they may find other ways to do it, like pushing away the product you're endorsing instead. Now, having said that, I don't think Dylan did this on purpose. The leaning into the camera is probably out of a desire to look confident, which is normal. But Dylan actually takes it further than Fred, because Dylan has a tendency to stare into the camera with extremely wide eyes, which is probably due to not wanting to squint in the bright lights, but can come off as even more aggressive and unsettling for viewers. Unfortunately, the camera is the audience's eyes and ears, and when you're recording, it can be easy to forget that things that seem fine with a small recording device come off differently on the other side, especially when the viewer can't shift away, or hold up a hand, or give you another sign to back off, which would stop that in real life. But regardless, I think these things help to illustrate the point, that there are people who think the bad things we might imagine, but a large portion of how we react to each other, which we think is due to bias or skin color or orientation, is actually due to these other things, which we can control, and which, if we do, can take an environment where everyone seems hopelessly hateful and suddenly make it cool and accepting. And that, to me, is part of the importance of being willing to look at what's really causing our disputes and to talk with each other. When we don't, we can end up with situations like the one at Target, where people got mixed up between Pride Month attire and intimate attire, which are not things you put in front of a store. In the same way you don't see jock straps next to the checkout register. And when we entangle those things, we can make it look like people are against things that otherwise they'd have no problem with. And we can hurt the sales of products like Bud Light that bear no relation to any of it in the first place. And by the way, what exactly is a family pack of beer supposed to be? Anyway, the decision was made. Bud Light ended up with an ad campaign that had a lot of accidental negativity, but then it got pushed over the top into that boycott. I'd like to point out also how that happened, because we've talked about what makes people suddenly buy into an idea that for a long time they seem not to care about. And what we've said is that the appeal of the thing itself has to get combined with outside things that give it extra emotional power, especially social momentum. I think the key in this case was the Kid Rock video. It got viewed over 50 million times on Twitter, and that was a celebrity endorsement in and of itself. Usually the person who recommends the thing to everyone else has their own personal reason that they did so, since it didn't have social momentum when they decided. In Kid Rock's case, I'm not 100% sure what his personal motivation was, but the result was exactly as expected. That social boost, plus something with genuine internal value, spread to 50 million people, was a phenomenon, especially because the act of pushing back against Bud Light became something that had even more value, because now there was a huge conflict involved, but also it was confirming things that people like to believe, like that the average person still has power in the world, and that corporations don't control everything we think and see. I followed the whole thing too. It was like watching David beat Goliath. You can feel that emotionally, from either side. I honestly even thought that the media were rooting for it, and enjoying it almost despite themselves. So it was basically a runaway train. Ultimately, I think Bud Light ended up losing a full third of their customer base, and lost its spot as the #1 beer in America. And that made it one of the most successful boycotts in history. And just to be clear, it was really a boycott. People often mix up boycotts and cancel culture. Cancel culture is when people try to take something off the air or make a person lose their job, so no one can watch or use their product, even people that agree with it. A boycott is when people say that they themselves won't use a product. Boycotts are matters of personal choice, which is fine. However, causing a boycott on a massive scale, if you're an ad executive, is not fine. It's actually the exact opposite of what you're supposed to do. And as far as we know, there was one person at the company who seemed to be responsible. People were wondering whether or not she really had been fired, or whether they were just putting her on a leave of absence until things blew over. I think she was basically fired, but they have a lot of legal issues with firing people, so they had to call it something else. There's no evil agenda that I think is being enacted to where they would bring her back to secretly do more of this. And also, they got rid of someone else who worked with her, which indicates to me that they weren't just removing the people who the media knew about, but the actual people who okayed the ad. And that firing makes perfect sense to me. Again, I don't think you should punish someone for being a Republican or Democrat, or for their gender or orientation. But I think she should have been removed because she showed terrible judgment, in more than one way. Like, for example, mistaking attention for admiration. There are people who get a lot of views on social media, for various reasons, algorithms, marketing, controversy, and so on, and that means that just because people look at someone doesn't mean people like the person. And handing a disturbing amount of money and making a commemorative can on top of it for someone who a lot of people don't like and who didn't show any talent or do much to earn it is going to irritate a lot of people. And it's even worse when that person has nothing to do with the things that people associate with your product. And furthermore, the whole thing gets even worse if you yourself come out and insult the brand. If Bud Light was fratty and out of touch, then you're saying the same thing about your own company and all the people and effort that went into creating that brand. And you're saying that about the people who drink the beer. I'm not a marketing executive myself, but I imagine you have to be able to read a room and know that is a terrible idea. I think that honestly, it comes from the environment on social media and people not being able to listen to each other or see the humanity on the other side. So they get dismissive, imagine one group is evil, and feel a moral need to attack them in one way or another, which is a big problem if you are also trying to do business with those people. And as time went on, I actually think that same dynamic of not communicating is what drew the boycott out and turned it into a long-term siege. AB InBev, the company that makes Bud Light, didn't know how to respond to this whole thing. And they took the strategy of basically just not saying anything and waiting for it to blow over. But the whole boycott really was because people felt insulted by the comments she made and the way the ad campaign dismissed the things they care about. When we as people respond to an insult, the purpose of that response is to get the other person to recognize that they insulted us, so they can undo that damage and then won't do it again. Or, barring that, to harm the person in return, which will also discourage them from doing it. If you don't respond after you've insulted a person, the person you insulted will just continually strike back at you until they either see that you recognize what you did, that you genuinely realize you caused a problem, or if not that, that you suffer consequences. And so by not responding, the people at the company created a sort of never-ending assault, where people were seeking to cause some negative result to Bud Light that they could see to make the castle collapse, so they could be satisfied. In this case, it was watching the sales of Bud Light go down. But I actually think they could put the whole thing to rest much sooner. The boycotters said they wanted an apology, but the people at the company felt like they couldn't do that because it would mean they were abandoning the trans community. But like we talked about, I don't think the problem was really related to the trans community, and the company could have addressed it in a way that would have made most of the boycotters feel satisfied, without causing too much backlash from others. What I think they needed to do was have the people who visibly caused the problem, in this case probably Dylan, Alyssa, and maybe the head of the American branch of the company, do a video call with Kid Rock and a couple of other people who are representing the boycott and who would be reasonable, and talk to each other. I know that can be scary, since in this case people imagine each other to basically be monsters. But actually, when you speak to people face to face and you can see them reacting to your words, it breaks down that barrier that makes us feel like we're not heard, and which causes us to be so aggressive online, which we've talked about.
Hey, that's the CEO of Anheuser-Busch. Trump's like, you want to go talk to him? I'm like, I do. So me and him go over. We actually had a great conversation.
Really?
And from there, I think that the boycotters could have made it clear that their problem is really about Bud Light abandoning sports and the other hobbies and activities they care about, and saying they were fratty and out of touch. Then they could actually see Alyssa acknowledge their words and react. And it actually would give Alyssa and Dylan, and the head of the company, a chance to say directly, in public, that they didn't mean to do that. I also think that would give Kid Rock and whoever else was there a chance to tell Dylan that they're not against what Dylan is doing, and they want people to be happy as whatever they choose to be, as long as we're free to live our own lives in our own space, which really is what I think is the case, and what I think people would definitely see once we got all the other negative stuff out of the way. But it didn't happen, and the boycott did. I know that many months later, Kid Rock has said that he no longer boycotts the company, but I don't know how other people will react. Because once that happens and people feel that insult or threat, our other emotions basically shut down. Our mind won't let us feel anything positive about the brand or thing in question, so that we don't risk promoting something that was harmful to us. And without any type of healing or acknowledgement, I think some people have probably just changed brands for the long term. We'll see if they eventually are satisfied and go back. I know Bud Light has started to make some moves to try to relate to them again, and that may factor into it. But either way, I think this will go down as a major case study in the dangers of mixing social goals with business ones, which we'll talk about more, and the importance of being able to listen and not just speak. Thanks, let me know what you think in the comments. If you liked this, please subscribe and turn on your notifications, and I'll talk to you soon.